census revealed? What's the fuss? And it's more a look about what we like about the census, and because I've written it, it's what I especially like about the census. So I'll be looking a bit about the history and going through and say we'll deal with the 1921 census a little bit further down the line. So let's just get started straight in. We know that the census has been used by those in charge for at least 6,000 years. The Babylonians used them. That's a picture of a sheep census. And the Egyptians used them. And the Chinese, the Han Dynasty in 2 AD, we know they recorded 57.67 million people living in over 12 million households. So even then, the numbers are really high. In this country, if you discount any censuses taken in Roman times, which you know there are a few, also if you discount the Doomsday Book, which was a census in a way, and the sadly incomplete 100 rolls, the first actual census, as we know it, was only undertaken in 1801. And the simple reason for this was that British government, successive ones, didn't like the idea of taking a census because they thought that a population count would reveal the nation's strengths and weaknesses to foreign enemies.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Because we're getting a lot of feedback. I think it may be because some people aren't muted. I'm just going to go and check.
While you're doing that, we've got this
lovely picture. Sorry about this, everyone. Once everyone's muted. Okay, let's see. Start talking again, John.
That sounds better.
Much better. Brilliant. Much better. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So, yeah, basically, they decided we don't want to do these censuses because it's going to show our numbers of people, and anybody who wants to attack us or invade us is going to get a lot of information for it, making us very vulnerable. And of course, at the time this was going on, the public enemy number one was good old Bonaparte there. So, you know, they were really not liked it. It began to change around mid-1700s, basically. Sounds crazy, but the population at last recovered from the Black Death. It'd taken sort of almost 400 years to do this. At last recovered. The revolution was starting. Basically, the population was growing rapidly. In 1798, this chap here, Thomas Malthus, who was a very well-respected economist and demographer, he published a little essay. You see the title there on the right, an essay on the principle of population, or review of its past and present effects on happiness. He postulated that an increase in food production improved the well-being of the population, but it was only temporary, as it led to population growth, which in turn led to a higher demand for food and lowered the standards of living until the food supply was increased. So it's a cyclical nature. It became known as the Malthusian trap, and it caused huge concern in the upper classes and in government. Malthus argued that population growth would soon outstrip supplies of food and resources in the country, leading to widespread famine and widespread disease. And these are a couple of cartoons from the day. The bottom one on the right there, Father Thames introduced his offspring to the fair city of London, is a especially nasty one. This in turn would lead to public agitation, civil unrest, and ultimately financial collapse and revolution. And these were the two ideas that really terrified the upper classes, the landed gentry who made up most of the government there. Particularly like the picture on the top right there with the king's head here on a plate. It was the sort of thing, of course, with revolutions going on around us, in France especially, this was always in the minds of the upper classes and the government. So,
Ron, I'm just going to stop you again. I'm so sorry. The background noise, a lot of people are putting a message to say that it's quite distracting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everybody. I'm going to do a mute all, which will mute you as well.
Yeah,
and then I'll unmute you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so that's mute all. And then... you unmute yourself, John?
Yep, I've done that. Is that better? Brilliant. Let's try that.
That is fabulous. Yeah, that's good.
Fingers crossed, folks. Told you we're rusty. So anyway, Malthus's views, it caused huge concern. And basically because the government started to really think about, well, are we going to have enough food for the country, basically? So within 2 years, the government did a U-turn and with Parliament support passed the Census Act in 1800. This led to the first official census taking place in March 1801. The information was collected mainly by parish officials, the overseers of the four, aided by parish constables and other officers of the peace, where those two other places weren't actually there. And it was quite interesting. It revealed 8.9 million people living in 1.8 million houses. The details recorded for each parish, township, or each place were as follows: the number of inhabited and uninhabited houses, how many persons there were, and that was broken down to numbers of males, females, and also families. How many persons were employed in agriculture, in trade, in manufacturing or handicrafts, and how many neither. Also, they looked at how many baptisms and burials in the years from 1700 to 1800, distinguishing males from females. So that, of course, brought in the parish vicars and things, having to look through all their records, their registers. It also looked at how many marriages occurred in each year from 1754 up to 1800. And lastly, what's important about it is it didn't actually record details. So individuals and their names were not recorded in this. So it's a useful bit of information, but it's not too useful for family historians. And this is an example of the sort of thing we're looking at. This is from the Ashelworth parish register. So the vicar took it into his head to write this down. It's a bit of a scrappy writing, as most vicars probably are. And it basically just says, March the 10th, the numbering of the inhabitants of this parish taken by order of government, the numbers were as followed. And it goes on to say 80 families, 80 houses, 88 families, 5 uninhabited houses, 237 males, 239 females, and it breaks that down. So a total of 476, 421 were employed, with a certain number in agriculture and a certain number in trade. I think what's telling about this one is the fact that the vicar is written taken by order of government. So it wasn't a universally popular thing. That's something to be bearing in mind. Since then, there's been a census every 10 years, apart from World War II, when it was stopped, just in case, again, for the same reason as the first one was taken. What if the enemies find out about it? And the 1841 census is regarded as the first modern one. And that's the one we've probably all seen or used at some time, undertaken by the Registrar General and the staff of what was then the newly created General Register Office. The information was processed by an army of clerks using pens and paper, and the system they used was still basically used the same system for the census today. 1911, punch cards with mechanical sorting and counting machines were introduced. Prior to this, it was all just clerks and other people. Computers used first time in 1961, so a long time ago now, basically. Today they're all organised by the Office for National Statistics. So again, it's quite a good body. If you go onto their website, there was lots of other useful information that they have as well. Okay, look at the enumerators. The people who work on the ground for the census are the enumerators. We've heard the name. It was a quite short-term contract. They were engaged only for a few weeks before and after the census night, so it wasn't anything you could make a career of. Most were teachers, office clerks, and other literate and numerate individuals. Obviously, you had to be able to read and write, otherwise you couldn't really do it. Before the census, the enumerator had to identify all the households in their enumeration district and address a census schedule for each one. And on the front of each schedule, he had to write the name and address of the householder who was responsible for completing and returning the schedule. So he had a fair bit of work to do. They then had to write the registration district, the sub-district, if it was one, the enumeration district number, and then fold all that up so the housekeeper's address was actually visible. And some census enumerators actually had stamps. They could stamp it and do all this on it. We haven't got any in the archives, but I have seen one in National Archives. So the enumeration districts, they were decided on a mix of population density and physical size. So it's a bit of a grey area how these were sorted out. Each one was supposed to be a manageable area that could be covered by the enumerator in the course of a day. So of course, in urban areas, this might, in cities, this might mean 300 or more households, but in just a few streets. So they're quite small. Whereas in rural areas, the enumerator might have to cover on foot, by bicycle or horse, a route of over 5 or more miles, visiting all the hamlets, isolated cottages and farms within that district. So it did vary enormously on what they had to do. So before each census night, they would deliver this form to the household and give them instructions that it was supposed to be recorded on the one night and not before and afterwards. Whether that was ever true, we don't know. There must be some variation in that. I know for the last census we did, you had like a couple of weeks to fill it in. So these forms, which were then called schedules, they were collected up by the enumerator a few days afterwards. If people had problems filling it in, the enumerator could help. So from 1841 up to 1901, these schedules were then copied into enumeration books. After this, the original schedules were destroyed, although there are some rare survivals. We haven't got any in Gloucestershire that I know of, but there are some elsewhere. So it's these that you see on the census today, if you go online, or if you've, still looking at the old microfilms, this is what you see. But what's interesting, that stopped in 1901. For 1911, you view the actual original schedules, which is very good. The enumerators were free to collect census returns however they wanted to do it, although they did have to record the route that they took. So this information is recorded at the start of each district, and it's called a description of the enumeration district, something we very rarely look at unless you're actually ferreting around in the census, but that's a general picture of what it was. Sometimes they're very straightforward, very clear. Otherwise they're a little bit sort of, a bit vague, like the example here, all that part of the parish of Bybury, so you don't really know which way they're going around or know quite where it ends. This is one for Alveston, which again, it's a main road going through it, but it lies either side. So he has here the actual enumerators put all that part of the parish of Alveston, which lies on the eastern side of the Turnpike Road, extending from its junction with Alveston Parish, near and including the residence of Lucy Clark at Rudgeway, to the termination of the parish, near and including the residence of Mr. Edward Rudge, Gravesend, which is all very well, but you've got to know where those two places are to figure out where it is. Sometimes they're a bit more complicated. This is one for Coley. All that part of the parish of Coley lying on the upper or easterly side of a line drawn in a straight direction, commencing at and including Mr. Hill's Betworthy farmhouse, and from thence to the boundary of the parish of Froster. And we'll look at that one in a minute. But you see, it's a little bit more difficult to figure out where he's going there, because you've got to figure out where he's drawing these lines. So you can use the census to locate individual families if you know where they lived. So, it's easier in rural locations, way harder in towns and cities simply because of their sheer size. So sometimes you can trace the route on maps. The 1881 baseline OS map, which you can access on Know Your Place free of charge, and is shown here, that's a really good one to use. It's close enough, to most of the census. This one is that sort of example from Coley earlier. So you can see Betworthy Farm at the bottom there, and the line that the enumerator said extended straight up to the top of the parish. So presumably that part of the census deals with everything on the east side of that line, and there's another part for the west. I've not looked into that, but that's how I understand that one. It's usually easier, if you're looking through the census, to look for recognisable places, such as there's usually a pub or an inn, a smithy or a mill or a manor house. Sometimes they're the easiest ones to start, and you get an idea of how this chap's going around, especially if you look at the enumerator's description. However, it's worth bearing in mind that it was actually quite rare for an enumerator to do a census twice. And inevitably, the next census along, done by a different person, he rarely took the same route. So you can't usually find the dwelling family in the same place in different census. They're sometimes different. In some places, it is obvious because it's a village in a circle. There are a couple of those in the Cotswolds, and you have to do it in one way. But a lot of places, it isn't. And you noticed I've been mentioning he had to do it. As far as I know, there are very, very few census enumerators who are females. It was largely male practice. I might be wrong. I'd love to be proved wrong, but as far as I've not ever come across any. So when the census is done, well, in the UK, it's always a Sunday, and that's simply to try and catch most people at home. They're generally people aren't working on Sunday, so they should be at home. And the dates of the census are fairly easy to find out. They're nearly always in the springtime. You very rarely get them any of the time. 1921, one took place in June. I'm not sure why that was. Not sort of saying anything to say why it's so different, but generally it's always around about this first part of the year. So what can you find in them? Well, we all know what we're looking at. 1841 census, the earliest one, you basically get some basic, very basic information: name, surname, age, their sex, occupation, whether they were born in the county they were enumerated in, or if they were born in Scotland, Ireland, or foreign parts. A problem with the 1841 census is it, you know, it basically doesn't tell you sort of where they are, except for the main thing. But also the biggest problem is it's actually transcribed in pencil and not in pen. So a lot of it is very, very faint. It's very hard to read. That they changed that for the next census. Now, for the next few slides, we're going to be looking at the different census. We'll flip through them fairly quickly. So 1851, it was the same as 1841, but it had these extra things. So you got the street and the road, house number and name. You know, in rural places without the name, it's very difficult to find that. You've got the relationship of people in there. So the relationship of the person enumerated to the head of the family, that can be very useful. You get their marital status, which is, again, is really handy. And you get their birthplace, you know, actually locally. So for the first time, you can see where they came from. You also get a column at the end, which is very NPC today, records whether they were blind, deaf, or an idiot. Very non-PC terms, but you know, you've got to look at this is the language they used at the time. So moving on, so 1871, same as 1851, 61, except for that last column, which has now been altered to read blind, deaf, and dumb, imbecile, idiot, lunatic. You know, quite how they decided what the difference was, I don't know. There's you know, be quite interesting to look at that. This example is from the 1881 census. Arlingham shows that Sarah Barnes, she's roughly in the middle there, age 44, she was deaf. You know, what they did with this information, I don't know, I have to say. The end column, though, is also used for recording other disabilities, and this is one from Longley, not far away from Arlingham, and it records 18-year-old William Gower. He was recorded as a cripple. Again, we don't know why he was. Was it from birth? Was it an accident? We don't know. That's one of the annoying things about the census. You see this lovely bit of information, and you can't really find out much more about it. The 1891 and 1901 censuses, you know, again, more information again, primarily adding extra columns on whether they're in the employer, employed, or neither employer nor employed, which is quite complicated, I think. And sometimes they had, you know, the later one, 1901, employer working own account with new columns added. So they cram in more and more information in there all the time. From 1851 onward, special books were created for institutions such as workhouses, army barracks, and the hospitals. The results are usually included in the usual return, so you need to know where it was in the area to find the right district. That, you know, that can be quite problematical sometimes, especially because the districts sometimes changed and they got bigger and some more recreated. But this is a typical example. This is the one for the Cheltenham Workhouse, and you know, it's basically a list of people. We'll have another look at one later. Census returns are also done for prisons. This is from the 1881 census for Gloucester Jail. Oddly, they didn't always get a special book, however, so they normally just slot into the series. I'm not quite sure why they decided that sort of workhouses had to have a special one and prisons didn't. You'd have thought they would have thought about it like this. But again, they're quite interesting. You can read through. You don't get any details of any sentences, etc. But you do get lots of names and lots of places of origin. I like this one. This is from the Gloucester Jail as well. It's the front page. So at the very top, you've got the clerk of the prison. Presumably, he's the chap who filled it in. We're not sure. But what I like about this one is it gives you some idea of the female warders as well. So especially in the middle of there, you've got sort of 4 or 5, a matron and 4 other females who were actually prison guards, presumably for the actual female wards in the prison. Sea and shipping is quite complicated. There are special forms introduced in 1851, but none of them are known to survive. So in practice, if you're looking at ships, 1861 is where you've got to start. So it included returns from the Royal Navy and merchant shipping at sea, in ports, at home, and also abroad. Technically, the master was responsible for completing these forms, and the instructions said that he had to be handed into the HM Customs with the least possible delay or face a fine of £5, which is quite a bit of money then. But these returns are really far from complete, and they're difficult simply because it's collecting them. You know, ships were halfway around the world, and they had to come back, deliver the forms. You know, when all the rest of the stuff had been worked through, ships were lost and wrecked, and this rate of shipping wrecks at this time was horrendous. tenders, but many ships didn't make it. Of course, in Gloucestershire, that's not affecting us too much because a lot of our boats here are barges like this one here, is the Garibaldi of Lechlade. So from the 1861 to 91 censuses, the vessels and ports listed at the end of their districts where they were moored. Those that are classed as being in foreign waters, which means anywhere that wasn't the vessel's home port, these are actually listed as separately under vessels. So if you go on to, this is from Ancestry, go on to there, look at the districts in Gloucestershire. You can get that through our website and Family History. We'll look at that later. But you'll see a category for vessels there, and I've highlighted it on the top right there. Inside this category, each vessel is actually listed as a district. So, you know, you basically have to click on that and you'll see the census for the ship. Now, it is awkward, has to be said, it's quite awkward because you've got to know where the ship was at the time of the census. The search engines aren't always brilliant for this, but also because there are lots of ships called, for example, the Lucy. There'd be hundreds of them. Also, it's difficult finding the ports. I've been looking for sharp nest docks in a couple of the censuses, and I can't find it anywhere. I mean, that's probably just me not looking hard enough, but it gives you an idea of how difficult it can be. This shows one for the ship-based canal boat, basic Brimscombe. You know, this is what you're getting. It's pretty much similar to what you're going to see in the normal census. You get a front page, which you've got on the right there. These were folded up, and then you've got the right-hand page, which gives the people on the boat. Now, they're saying, I've mentioned earlier, ships can be well away from where they should be. This is from the 1881 census, which I just came across by accident, really. I thought quite liked it. And it's for Arlingham, District 2. And it has an entry down there for the Wherry, which is a half-deck trow with a crew of 3. What was she doing there? Well, it's probably the fact that on census night, she was anchored on the riverbank at Arlingham, waiting for the tide to take her down to Bristol or to come up to Gloucester. Normally, they're anchored up for the downriver rather than the upriver legs. What I found interesting after looking at this for a while, if you have a look at the bottom of the crewman list, there's a John Willivoys here. And if you look up to, it says number 68, look across, you see a John Willivoys there. So he's a waterman. It sounds like they actually were going downriver, knew they couldn't make it, and could Arlingham outside John's house in order to get some decent home cooked grub. So again, you can get some real nice little snippets from this. From this, you could look up the Wherry. You could use the records we have, you know, to find out a proper port of registry, to find out a lot about her, bought and sold. The Board of Trade returns, half-year returns would sort of show this a lot. And they are something we'd like to do a talk on later in the year, I think. Oh gosh, what's that? So if you're interested in ships, there are some good websites around, and this is one I found last year. Yeah, it's quite a good one. It's only good for 1881, but I think people have done them for other ports now as well. So it's basically, you go onto that, have a click on it and play around. I just found this by chance, simply by putting ships in UK ports, and that's what popped up. But I quite recommend it. It's quite good. Don't think it's 100% complete though, to be honest. So looking at the comments and abbreviations you find on them, the relationship one is very important, usually all self-explanatory, so head, wife, daughter, etc. Sometimes you have to be careful with sons and daughters because they can actually be grandsons or granddaughters to the head, or sometimes the sort of son's father can be actually living in the house, but he's not the head. So you have to look out for sort of things like that. But I mean, they're usually fairly straightforward. And again, moving on to the condition, basically married or unmarried, again, fairly straightforward. WW, widowed, widower, etc. Divorced isn't an official category in the early census, but it does appear occasionally, and it does appear in later census years. So rank, profession, occupation, one of the favourite ones. You've got, this is where you get sort of getting the meat and the bones, I think, of the census. So we get aglabs, annuitants, lots of interesting sort of categories of people. If you see in or independent or on own account, it usually means that they had money coming in from other ways, or they're self-employed. Pensioners pop up, especially in the later years. Usually it meant an army pensioner, because if they were a navy pensioner, they would be put down as a Greenwich pensioner or a police pensioner. Old age pensions were introduced in 1908, so the term old age pensioner technically appears in 1911 and onwards. Markings and records. Most of the census returns have various marks and slashes, typically right on the word you're trying to read or the name, so they can be quite awkward. These were generally made by workers in the process of compiling statistics, but the enumerators were supposed to put marks in. So they were supposed to put a signal diagonal line after the last name in a family or a household, and a double diagonal after the last name in a building and housing unit. It is fairly erratic, though, you have to say that. It's, you know, and some of the markings, you know, they just read differently at all. It's really strange. So what do we like about the census, or what do I like about the census? Well, the statistics. You know, there's lots of actually sites out there which have a lot of statistics on census, and this is one that's just caught my eye the other day when I was putting this together. So between the 1851 and 1901 census, a 30% decrease in agricultural workers. Now that's quite a lot, you know. This is the time we're going through the Victorian sort of modernisation, the golden age of farming. Yet they were losing a lot of people. So there's all sorts of these out here. And again, another one I like there: a 15% increase in services in those 50 years. So there's usually a lot of information you can find out. And again, there's a lot of books out there and websites that deal with this in you know, really great detail. Again, occupations, I love these. These can be fascinating things. This one is from the 1901 census for Cheltenham Workhouse. So you've got the usual jobs, you know, laundress, labourer, charwoman. But in this one, we've got a fly driver, who is a type of carriage, a sawyer. You don't often get those, probably a sawpit worker. Brickmaker, again, you know, bricklayers, yes, but breakers, not so common. Gentleman's servant, and the one I like best is a scavenger for the local corporation. So it's basically a dustman to you and me today. If you have a look at this one, most of these poor people in here have the abbreviation RET in there somewhere. You know, this means they're retired. So, and you know, you can't see most of the ages in this column because I have to cut it off to get space in. But this is a sort of reminder that, you know, back then, you know, elderly folks generally ended up in the workhouse and their working days are over, you know, which is, you know, quite terrible if they especially didn't have families to look after them. I was playing around, looking at some stuff, and I found this figure. There were about 1,333,792 occupations in the 1881 census alone. And they go from an ABCdarian, which is an alphabet teacher, to, I think the word says, sorry, I can't pronounce that. It's a specialist type of brewer. There's actually two of them. There's two different types. You know, so there's loads of occupations out there. Some of the problem is, like, do you distinguish if somebody says that they're a labourer? Fair enough. In their town, they're probably a general labourer. If they're in a country, are they agricultural labourers? There's lots of this, you know, people drilling down trying to find out what people were. This is then again picked up from the 1881 Arlingham census. It's got scholars, a staymaker, which is a nice one, laundress, carpenter. There are loads of them, and they're really interesting. You know, so a quick scrounge through the census, you'll always pop up some really interesting jobs. In farms, what's good about rural locations, the census usually give you the size of the farm and very often how many people the farmer employed. So it's a bit of a scrappy one, I must admit. I chose it because halfway down there's engine driver traction, which I liked working on a farm. But you see here, farmer of 10 acres. There's another one down of 18 acres. I thought it was 180 at first, but it's definitely 18. But actually employing 3 men and a boy, that sort of thing. So there are some little bits of information you can find out. You know, I've got a farm, you know, I know it on the census. You know, look through the census, you'll probably find how many men it actually employed. I quite like looking at upper class households, the posh households they call them. They're always interesting, usually for the staff they have. You know, if you're a fan of Downton Abbey, you know, or Gosford Park, you know, these are really interesting seeing what there are. And this is Clan of Falls in Lydney, which, you know, it's a very modest country house in, let's face it, a bit of a rural backwater compared to the rest of the county. Sorry, Foresters. But the staff here: butler, footman, cook, housekeeper, lady's maid, 3 housemaids, kitchen, scullery maid, nurse, governess, coachman, and 3 grooms. So I had quite a few people there just keeping this one house going over. Of course, we're great with our country houses in Gloucestershire. This is the 1891 census for Badminton House, 4 pages worth. Maybe more. I mean, it's difficult to tell at one point, but I sort of counted them up, and there's roughly 65 staff and servants for 6 family members and just 4 visitors. So, you know, this really is a huge, this is a Gosford Park place. I mean, Badminton's a huge place, the Duke of Beaufort. what I found interesting as well is technically the head of the household should have done this. I don't think the Duke of Beaufort would have sat there and written out all this. There's I think it's on about page 3. There's a house clerk, and I think he would have probably done it, the housekeeper clerk. So it probably down to him. But again, there's you can look at one of these in better detail in the exhibition we're going to put up online after this one. Posh townhouses, on the other hand, they tended to operate with far fewer staff. So this is from the All Saints area, Cheltenham, Pittville area. And basically, it's the realm of retired army officers, lawyers, and lots of others living on their own means. And you can say they generally had far fewer staff. A cook, housemaid, parlourmaid, and a nurse maybe. Some had a groom as well. So they operated with fewer staff. Largely because they were, after all, smaller houses. Tracking families through time is quite fun with the census. It's one good thing about it you can do. It's got to be said, it's way easier in rural locations where the families didn't move around too much and where you could pretty much guarantee offspring might just move down the road when they got married. So they didn't spread too far. Much harder in towns where they literally could move anywhere. And we're just going to look at this guy here. This is Alan J. Barnard. He was the enumerator for the 1901 census in Abenhall in the Forest. And I picked him quite by chance. I was looking at this and I thought, well, he looks an interesting character. So there he is. He's actually written this page out. Okay, let's have a look at him. Here he is in the census itself. So he's basically living in the judge's lodgings there. You can see he's about the third one down. I've got a bar on top of my image and I can't see it very well, I have to say, but he's there. His father was a coal cutter, so he's a miner. He's a farmer and an assistant overseer, so he was working in the parish anyway. By the time of 1911 census, so 10 years further on, had a Cinderford girl, always risky, and he had 3 daughters, and he was actually a cattle farmer at nearby Plump Hill, which is, if you know Abenhall, you go down to Mitcheldean, you head up towards Cinderford, that's Plump Hill there. So again, a nice one. But I thought, well, let's play around with this one. So I basically went a little bit further back and we found him. There he is. Alan is the sort of 5th person down there. He's a scholar stroke pupil teacher. And the pupil teachers are interesting as they basically, they were taught on the job to be a teacher. By this time, however, they were sort of realizing that it was too much. You couldn't expect these sort of, local children to be taught by the teacher who might not have been good. So they started to open up teacher training colleges at around about this time. Going further back, 1881 census, here he is, he's age 7 and he's a scholar, still living in the same sort of house, basically. Obviously, he wasn't born around in 1871, it's 10 years early on, but it's an idea of what you can do with the census. I just knew he'd been born at Abenhall. I wouldn't have found him in the Abenhall Parish Baptism Register, so there he is. So you can do lots of things with these. One of the things I like about it, occasionally you find the nudge, nudge, wink, wink pages. So this is the one for the 1871 census, Albert Square, maybe not EastEnders, but it's in St Paul's in Shadwell. It's a very scrappy entry, and even the original is awful. But it's got, underneath, you can just make out names in there, visitor unknown, and beneath that, the guy, another visitor unknown. And the enumerators put at the bottom here, very scrappy note. These fallen women very often don't know either the names or ages of those men who sleep with them. Their ages are guessed that. So this is basically a sort of a brothel, or it's a knocking area anyway. So, they were common. I've not found any in Gloucester. It'd be interesting to see if there was some. But you can crop up with these things. Of course, if you're looking for these people, it can be very awkward. Okay, let's move on to the 1921 census. You'll have noticed there's a lot of absence of that in this talk, and there's good reasons why. But why is it important? Well, the 1931 census was destroyed in a fire. Okay, and we're not sure. It wasn't enemy action that destroyed it. It was probably, they're not sure. It might have been a lighted cigarette of a watchman or something. There's lots of arguments. But because then the 1941 census was cancelled due to World War II, at least the 1921 census is sort of setting a key point in history before 1951. You did have in World War II, you had the Registration Act, which is a bit like a census, but it's not quite as good. The 1921 census will also offer us a lot more detail than all previous census, because not only asked about occupations, but also their place of work, their employer, and the materials they worked with. So it's a little bit more information on, what people did. It also included divorce for the first time. It was still expensive, but you could get divorced. But also for those people under 15, so children, it recorded whether their parents were alive or dead, or, both were dead or one were dead. So it gets a lot of information like that. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as any other census, has to be said. But, it's everything we do with these gives us more information. So if you're doing family or local history, the more information you can get, the better. So what's the problem with it? Well, at the moment, 1921 census is only available in person at the National Archives in London or through Find My Past. And that's currently a pay-per-view or pay via subscription. Fingers crossed, in a year or so, it should be available for free at the archives of Gloucestershire libraries. It's also not available at the Family History Centre at the moment for the same reason. It basically is Find My Past, we're charging an awful lot of money for it. In the cash-strapped times, you've just got to be careful. For all the other census, however, you can find them on Ancestry or Find My Past or the National Archives. And you can access Ancestry free at the archives, any Gloucestershire library, or the Gloucestershire Family History Society Centre at the hub. Or you can do it at home and subscribe to ancestry.co.uk. And I would say, if you're looking at the census and you have any problems with trying to find things on it, it's well worth contacting the Family History Centre, because the Society know an awful lot about this. They have people who've been doing this stuff for many, many years, and they know ins and outs of it. So I always recommend, if you get stuck, have a word with the Gloucestershire Family History Society, because they are so good at this sort of stuff. So how do you search it? Well, the easiest way is using the institution's search engine. You'll need a name as a minimum, but beware the settings, because they very rarely do exactly what you want. And they have broad settings, exact settings, set it to exact, you won't get anybody, set it to broad, you get 10,000 people. So you've got to play around with this stuff. It's the only way around it. You can also browse a census. So if you go onto Ancestry, you can pick out Gloucestershire, you can pick out a parish, you can pick out a district, and you can just work your way through it. And that's one of the best ways of doing it. I love doing that, because again, you come across all these odd names, occupations, and what people are doing, the size of families, etc. So it's good fun to do. You can do it in towns and cities as well, but it's a lot harder. So finally, the Enumerators' despair. We've probably all heard the story. In 1841, the artist Turner rode out into the middle of the Thames on census night to avoid any enumerators. He had a real thing about these, because I've tried finding him later as well, and he's not on the 1851 census either, even though he was known he was living at Chelsea with a widower, Sophie Booth, at the time. When the census enumerator came down, he refused to put himself on the census. Of course, he died by the 1861 census, so he wasn't there either. So you will get people that you just can't find, and there are often good reasons for it. So that's the end of the talk. Hope you enjoyed it. We're going to get some chat questions. We'll try our best to answer any questions you have, but I say, we can't answer much about the 1921 census because I've not seen it. You can, however, use you still look at the index. So you can go on to Find My Past and you can use the index to find it. You'll find basic information. So is a person you're looking for in the census or not? You'll see the names there, but you don't see any information unless you put money in, basically, or use vouchers. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. So we're happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, John. And sorry, everybody, about the technical problems we were having at the beginning. John, if you stop sharing your screen. Yep.
There we go.
And I'm just going to get the view so that I can see all the participants. Is there anybody who would like to go back to those couple of slides right at the beginning when we were having difficulty with the audio? Oh, hang on, I've got some questions coming up in the chat, but just before we do that, did anybody miss anything that was crucial?
Just the first couple of slides. Just the first couple. It'd be nice just to see them again.
Would that be helpful? Is everyone happy with that? If you could,
yeah.
If you could just put your hand up, or John, are you happy just to go back to the first two slides? Yeah, thanks everybody, and I'm so sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the first sort of talky slide, basically. So it's a little bit about the really early census history. So basically, We know they've been used by the Babylonians, were the first people. They used it primarily for food information. All governments, what census do is they give governments raw information, so that they know how many people they have. Therefore, if it's going to be a famine somewhere or poor harvest in A, they can take food from B to A, etc., etc. So that's the main one. We know there was some census in Roman times in Britain. We don't have any information about what they found. I'm not aware of any of that has been found anywhere, to be honest. We know about census elsewhere in the Roman Empire, but there must have been some here, but we never got some. And the two other things that really acted like a bit like census, the Doomsday Book, which we all know and heard about, that gives you people, but it's not a real accurate count, everything through parishes. The 100 rolls are very, very good, except they give you names of people for the first time, except they're really incomplete. I think there's only 1 or 2 pages from Gloucestershire surviving, if that. I've not found any. And the next slide, was basically, why didn't the British government want census? Well, basically they thought it's going to, reveal our strengths and weaknesses to foreign powers. And at the time, this was all due to Bonaparte, bless him, sat there across the channel waiting to invade. So that's the first two anyway. Did everybody see Mr. Malthus as well? So he was the man who really kick-started the idea of a census, because he proposed this view that, if food increased, then everybody's happiness increases, but then you get higher population, which means food's harder to come by, so people sort of, are under pressure. So it's a cyclical argument, and this is what really kicked off the need for a census, so the government could start planning for future problems that they had.
Thank you, John. I think that was the ones where we were having difficulties. So that's great. So we got a few questions in the chat, and I'll go back to the first ones, but I'll ask them all. Okay, so I'll just go up to the top. It says, does John know if other council archives do a similar talk or Zoom to this one?
I would imagine they would do. I would have thought. I don't know of any. I must admit, I'm very parochial. I don't go stray far out much outside of Gloucestershire. It's far too scary. But I know I think the National Archives very often do. They often put talks up about various things. It's sort of something that most would do, I think, but it does depend a lot on local policy at the time, So I think that if you have a look around, if you're interested in a specific area, go onto the archives for the area and have a look, or the libraries. Sometimes the Family History Society is a very good place to find that information as well. So if you're interested in Avon, for example, or as it was called then, look at the Avon in Bristol and Avon Family History Society and have a look at there. Most people do, I think.
Our Family History Society, I know, do a wide range of talks, don't they? And it's worth getting in touch with them. They have all kinds of fascinating speakers. So next question, which is from Karen. I know there are various sites where you can download census blanks as PDFs to copy your own transcription into. But are you aware of any, ideally free, spreadsheet blanks you can download to fill in and then analyze the data? I'm not.
No. I mean, you can, if you just put a blank census form and do a Google search to see what pops up. Again, I would contact the Family History Society. They might know. I know there are lots of sort of stuff you can purchase to help you sort of do your family tree. Unfortunately, mine was done. Well, most of them was done, and I've not got that into it, to be honest. I'm for the local history side. But yeah, have a word with the Family History Society. They're going to be able to point you in the right direction.
I have sort of tried a Google search and with no joy, so I was just asking in case you.
Yeah, no.
I think there's an American company that sort of sells spreadsheet blanks, but it includes all the American ones as well. I think it's possibly got the British ones, but it's about 15 or 20 quid or something.
Have a chat with the Gloucestershire Family History Society. If there is any around, they will know, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks for the questions, Karen. Sorry we didn't have a good answer. Then a couple of people have asked about the 1939 census, John.
Yeah.
So perhaps if you just explain a little bit about that.
I called it the census. It wasn't technically a census. It's the Registration Act for World War II. They were starting to register people to make sure they had a who should be here, who shouldn't sort of thing. So that sort of acts like a mini census in a way. It doesn't have all the information. It was released, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. Some of it's still redacted for some reason. But again, it's the 1939 or 1940 Registration Act. It's available to look at. It's a mini census in all but name, not quite the same detail, but it serves as a sort of stopgap anyway. But again, I'd say go have a word with the Family History Society, because they've got people who are in that all the time, I know, and they can answer most of the
Can you see that on Ancestry, John?
I don't think, I've not spotted it. I mean, it might be. I've not spotted it. It might be more specialist than that, I think.
Okay. Now, Sarah Pegler is echoing the thoughts of many when she says, what a shame about the 1931 census. I'd love to see my grandparents on that one. Yeah. And it's such a big loss, isn't it?
Yeah, well, see, Emma there has just said it is, the 1939 is on Ancestry. So brilliant, yeah. And it's on Find My Past, as Elaine just said. Yeah, so yeah, it is there. I've just not looked at it.
Okay.
I will look at it, actually. That's interesting.
Emma Neve says the 1921 census was delayed due to industrial action, I believe.
Yeah, it would have been the general strike of 1921. So yeah, I guess, I assume they had by then, they were still using the enumerators. So maybe people, whether it was that they didn't get the stuff to the enumerators for the April time, maybe. I'm not sure. That'd be quite an interesting thing to find out why. Trouble is, if you try and research the history of the census, there's not an awful lot there on it, on the ins and outs of some of them. So you need to find somebody who's done a little bit of work on it. So someone like the British Association for Local History might have done some work on that.
Laura said she lives in and has been researching a 200-year-old Wesleyan chapel in Arlingham, and has found the 1851 ecclesiastical census. So that's something I don't know anything about.
There were the churches did the ecclesiastical censuses. We've got copies of the archives for them. They're not the most useful things, but they are fairly interesting. They give you names and numbers. I've not looked at one for many years, but if you do need to see them, we have them in the archives.
So Sue asks, can we listen to this again as it was recorded? And the answer is yes, Sue. So it would take a few days for it to go up on our website, because we need to do a bit of editing, and particularly on this one, because I forgot to press record at the beginning, and then we had those technical problems. So we'll edit out those problems, then it will go on the website, and you can listen to it again to your heart's delight. Emma said the 1939 register for dates of birth is very helpful, and it is on Ancestry and on Find My Past, apparently. So Sarah Pegler, again, if a woman is down on the census as married and her husband is not recorded in the household, does that suggest that he is around somewhere, i.e. not dead?
Well, yeah, I mean, it could be. It could be, for the classic examples, you get quite a few in the sort of like the nautical parishes where, the husbands aren't around because they're at sea. So there's lots of reasons why people aren't there. So, it could be the fact that he's just gone off and living with somebody else in the parish. I've seen a couple of examples of that, but there are lots of reasons why people don't appear on the census. There are some errors on transcription. We know there are some schedules that were lost. So like everything, it's not 100% complete, and you can't guarantee if they're not there. You can't, unless you find a reason why they are not there. So, for example, if it was a husband at sea, you might find him on a ship. That was interesting. I looked at earlier on with the Wherry Trow at Arlingham. He would have been recorded. He looks like he was recorded twice there. So he was recorded at home, but also on the boat. So you think, well, which one of those is correct? Which is why I'm assuming they went there for tea, and maybe went back and stepped on the boats. Okay. So unless if we found the original schedule, which of course has been destroyed, so we can't, it might have explained it there. There are lots of these ins and out things with the census that are very often hard to understand. And it can get so frustrating when you're looking for somebody who isn't there, when you think, well, they are there, especially...
Sorry, go on, John.
Especially if you're looking for somebody called Thomas Smith or something, it's a battle of the end then.
So lots of the questions in the chat, or lots of the chat is sort of people giving information to to everybody else in the group. But I'm going to read them out because not everybody can read the chat, I think. So I think there was a lot of unrest in 1921, and they took the decision to delay, which is more or less what you said, John. And the redacted names on the 1939 register were people who were still alive, and that's common practice, isn't it, John?
Yeah, that's common practice. Basically, if somebody's still alive, they tend to redact the names. You know, lots of reasons why, but not all of them straightforward. But yeah, that's a good reason I hadn't thought of that. But I thought there was some other information that was redacted on it as well. I don't know, but yeah, it's a good reason for them.
And Sarah North. Oh, sorry, go on. Who was that?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch what he said. Did he say they blacked them out?
Redacted, so it's basically where they sort of take out some of the information, so you don't see a whole transcript. For example, you know, you might miss names or something like that. So that's what it was. Redacted.
Basically, they do just black it out, don't they? They just black line through it.
Yes, yes, I saw that. Yeah, thank you.
Sarah Northern, thank you very much, Sarah, has said census blanks for the UK can be found here below the US forms, and she's given a link to an ancestry site, which we can send this around to. What we'll do is we'll send this around in an email to people who came after the chat. And so if you can't see the chat, don't worry, I will send that to you. Emma Neve said, I'd found husbands on vessels when family at home and mother listed as married. Okay, that was responding to an earlier question. And then Karen has answered her. Another missing husband was in the village, but at the local inn where he was a coachman.
And you could get the same for sort of like railway driver, guards and engine drivers and firemen. They might not be at the house at the house at the time. I've not come across sort of like, it'd be interesting to find if anybody's ever found of like a train that happened to be going overnight through somewhere. Where do they do it? Do they fit it in at home, or do they fit it in as a place there? I'd love to find out stuff like that. It'd be very interesting. And these are some of the beauty of the questions of the census. It throws up these really interesting ones. If you think about it too much, it just drives you insane. I mean, where would they go? Somebody going from Paddington to Edinburgh or Paddington to Bristol. Where are they going to be on the census? It'd be interesting.
So is that it from everyone? Anyone get any more questions before we close? Okay, thank you all very much for coming and for bearing with us as we got back into the stride. Hopefully by the time the next one comes around, we'll be a little bit more slick.
The talk on our next talk, which is going to be on the 23rd of February, I believe that's what it is. It's going to be looking at the history of Gloucester's civic buildings. So we're going to delve into that. So it's writing at the moment, it's quite interesting. There's stuff I'm finding out about. So Gloucester's basically civic buildings. It's got another working title. I can't remember what it is at the moment. But yeah, so please do join us for that one if you're interested.
Yeah, so we hope to see you all next time. Thank you all for coming, and see you again. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.